Welcome to the Sharp Way Show. I'm so happy that you're with me this evening, a little bit past 7 p.m. on the East Coast. And yes, I am here. It's important that you have me to talk to because some of you may say to yourself, Larry, I don't have enough libertarian people to talk to. Well, now you do, right? Awesome. It is Friday, and I'm so happy you're with me today. I have a very interesting guest today, and someone who I know from the past, but he decided to put together a book on two very odd topics, but he's going to tell us about those odd topics. And if you have some questions, please, of course, always put them in the chat so we can talk to him about it. He is a very interesting fellow. He is an author and musician. That's what I'll say. The man himself, Logan Albright. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Larry. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, absolutely. And for those of you who want to know what Logan's doing, you can head over to his website if you want to, loganalbright.com. Also, all of his other his details are in the show description on both YouTube and Facebook, so you can enjoy that if you like. Logan, you wrote a book about libertarianism and paganism.
That's correct.
This seems like a very, and you named it Libertarian and Paganism, so good choice of title there. Why pick that mix? It seems like an odd mix. And I'm sorry, I want to preface it a bit because of what's happened recently with elections recently. Most people, when you talk about libertarianism, they worry about, does Christianity work with libertarianism, right? Does fundamentalism work with libertarianism? You hear that type of thing often. It's rare you hear the concept of paganism and libertarianism. Why that mix?
Well, that's a great jumping off point because for me, Christianity doesn't work with libertarianism. I know there are many Christian libertarians, and I think that's wonderful. I'm happy if they can reconcile that for themselves. For me, I never could. And I was always sort of spiritually interested growing up, and I was trying to find where I fit. And I couldn't really find a home because I went to church and I've looked into other religions and nothing really clicked for me. So I was just sort of, agnostic for a long time. And then I got really into libertarianism, and I realized that part of my problem with the monotheistic religions, the Abrahamic religions, is there's a lot of focus on obedience and commandments and apologizing and things like that. I'm not really into that kind of stuff. It didn't really work for me. And so at a certain point, I discovered kind of neo-paganism, which is a umbrella term that encompasses a lot of different traditions that have become popular in the last 50 years or so, 70 years or so. And
hold on one second. You're saying popular. Do you mean popular in America, the West, the world? When you say popular, what do you mean by that?
They've been growing in popularity, particularly in America and Britain and the West. I believe that there was an article in, I think, Washington Post that said that neo-paganism is the fastest growing religion in America. There are now more Wiccans than there are Presbyterians in America. So it's growing. It's on the rise.
Wow.
And I found it really interesting.
To be forward, I have had more and more friends identify as Wiccan than ever. I think that, and I live in New York City. So, and we have a plethora of religions here. And so you know what, as you're saying it, I have had more friends who have kind of identified as Wiccan. So sorry to interrupt. I'm just kind of,
no, not at all.
I'm thinking.
New York City is a total hotbed of this kind of stuff. So it's a very, intellectually diverse place in that sense. But anyway, I was kind of drawn to this belief system, and I found myself attracted to it. And for a long time, I thought it was just a completely separate thing from my libertarianism, that there was nothing in common. They were just two different aspects of my personality and my interests. But as I started hanging out with more pagans and talking to more of them, and most of these people will not call themselves libertarians. They'll call themselves Democrats or progressives or leftists or things like that. But as I talked to more of them and I started reading more books, I noticed that there were all these similarities, and they were saying things that sounded familiar to me from my libertarian friends. And I started delving into it, and I'm like, actually, there's a lot in these two philosophies that make them natural companions, where you could naturally marry them together in a way that I think works really well. And the reason I wrote the book is because I feel like there's a lot of Americans right now who are feeling politically homeless and spiritually homeless. They don't feel like they're satisfied with the choices that have been presented to them by the two major political parties, and they don't feel like they're satisfied by the religious choices that have been presented to them, and they're looking for something. And so the book is basically an invitation to people who are curious to say, hey, if you're into libertarianism and you don't have a religion, maybe check out paganism. You might find it speaks to you. Or if you're a pagan and you're not really sure about this politics thing, maybe check out libertarianism. It might be something you're interested in. So I like, yeah, people make fun of me for picking the two smallest possible niche audiences I could find.
Yes. Yes.
I don't expect to do massive numbers with it, but it's something that no one else has written about. I did a Google search.
I never heard of it. So yes.
I did a Google search for libertarian paganism before I wrote the book, and there were no results. So I thought, well, there you go. There's a market opening for me. It may be a small one, but it's something that no one else is doing.
100%. When I saw it, I'm like, okay, like let's talk, right? So yeah, I'm with you. I was the same way. I was like, wait a minute, I hadn't heard this, but I see now that you say that, I see an obvious connection. It's, if I may, I feel like the combination is the idea of it being anti-establishment, right? If you're anti-establishment in politics, you probably want to move towards libertarianism. If you're anti-establishment in religion, you're saying, well, you probably want to move towards paganism. And if your personality is that way, both of those might meld or merge. Did I kind of get that right?
Yeah, that's what a big component of it is, sort of pushing back against the status quo, standing up for the underdog, the persecuted minority. There's a lot of that going on because, for many years, paganism was driven underground by the Catholic Church. We had things like the Inquisition, and the witchcraft laws in Britain were only repealed in the 1950s, making it legal to talk about this stuff in public. So, it has a long history of feeling like it's being held down by the establishment. And the same thing with libertarianism. It wasn't illegal to be a libertarian, but it's basically been your persona non grata in the political sphere if you're not a Democrat.
I know that feeling.
So there's certainly an aspect of it.
Yes, let me grab a couple comments if I could. Dan, it's so good to hear from you. It's my friend Dan Halloran, who I believe actually is a pagan himself. He says, not so rare. So there we go. You have a friend already. So there we go. That's good. Yes. If I can keep going here, let's see here. Joe asked a very important question. Oh, I'm sorry. First, Joe says, 2 small growing fish in 2 large ponds, political parties and religion. Interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah.
But he asked a very important question, which I want to cover, which is, what's paganism? How would you define that? When I was a kid, pagans were bad people, right? You would call someone a pagan as an insult, right? That was not a descriptor. It was an insult if you called someone a pagan. And I remember there was a motorcycle gang called the Pagans because they were bad guys, right? So my image as a kid was that the word was used as an insult or a negative thing. Can you tell me what your definition of paganism is?
Yeah, it's a great question because the word pagan did originate as basically an insult. It comes from Latin. It comes from Latin paganus, which means country dweller. So when Rome became Christian in the Roman Empire, they would criticize the people who lived out of the city and the country for worshiping the old gods as basically country bumpkins, as rubes who had these kind of ignorant old beliefs, and they were the pagans. And so until fairly recently, the word pagan has just meant non-Christian, like a heathen, a non-believer. But it has been reclaimed by people who embrace that label. And they often will use the term neo-pagan, which I don't really particularly love the term neo-pagan. I find the prefix neo aesthetically unpleasing, so I don't like using it. But
every time you hear neo, you think something's bad. Neo has kind of become what I guess the connotation is, oh, that's the bad ones. Anything is the bad of that thing.
Neoliberal, all that stuff is considered bad. Exactly. But they've reclaimed it, and it's essentially an umbrella term that describes many different traditions. Wiccans are the most well-known and the most common, but they're far from the only ones. There are Druids. There are people who try to reconstruct ancient practices from various traditions, like the Irish tradition or the Nordic tradition. It's basically describing people who are essentially non-monotheistic. They tend to be polytheistic or pantheistic, which is a way of identifying divinity with the universe instead of as separate from the universe. And there's a deep appreciation for the natural world and for nature within it. And that's kind of what unites all the different pagan traditions.
When people will often say things like, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. Is that the type of thing you mean, like that?
That's probably part of it. And like I said, it's a very diverse group of people. It's hard to really pin them down with one label. So there's certainly people who are non-religious but spiritual within the pagan community, but there's also people who I would call pretty devoutly religious within the pagan community. There's just a lot of different traditions that are encompassed with it. But the thing that unites them is basically an appreciation for the divine in nature and a love of the natural world.
So I guess if you looked at, say, for example, I don't know what would be there, maybe Abrahamic religions,
Mm-hmm.
while they all believe in one single God, very diverse in that. Some of them hate each other, right?
Yes.
Does the same thing happen in paganism? Like, do Wiccans hate, like, I don't know, people who Shintoists or something? Like, is that a thing? Does that same thing exist?
Not to the same extent. I mean, there's factioning that goes on, to be sure, like there is with any group. There's different there's different sub factions of Wicca, that different traditions that they kind of don't get along that well sometimes. But for the most part, we all get along great. I belong to an organization in Washington, D.C. called the Firefly House. It encompasses all these different traditions. There's people who follow the Nordic gods. There's Druids. There's people who are Wiccans. There's people who are atheists who are in our group, but still consider themselves to identify with the pagans. And we all get along great, and we all love each other. And so it's not an issue for us. But of course, there's going to be some amount of factioning, as there are with any organization, really.
Okay. Well, is there then an issue with libertarianism and paganism that doesn't seem to work well, right? Like, as you mentioned with Christianity, sometimes there are things that kind of overlap and kind of butt heads with libertarianism. Does that happen with paganism also?
I would say that there's nothing inherent in paganism that is anti-libertarian. There are, of course, lots of pagans who are hostile to libertarians and who are,
Sure.
very, very formally on the kind of progressive left side of things. So there can be problems with that. And it's been a little bit of an interesting kind of coming out party for me, revealing myself as a libertarian within pagan circles. But
Yes.
I don't think there's anything inherent within the religion that is hostile to freedom and to, personal self-determination. I think that's sort of the key of the whole religion, and which is, a big part of my motivation for writing the book. And so
Yeah.
I don't really see any kind of conflict there.
All the Wiccans that I know are far left.
Yeah.
Right. All that I know. Like, that's only my world. But also New York City. So a lot of people far left in New York City.
Yes.
But the Wiccans that I know, they're all far left that I know. And I can see where that would work. I get that, because most people who are very Christian tend to lean right. That's not 100% rule, obviously, but many do. So I could see how someone who was Wiccan would feel almost like unwelcome in a right-leaning or Republican party, right? They would feel like, oh no, you can't like me because I'm not Christian or something or whatever. That's what I feel. I mean, is that true or no?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think a lot of people don't know what libertarianism is. And so you may get a lot of people who will consider themselves on the left, but actually be more libertarian than they realize. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, is to try to, wake people up to this idea that maybe I am more for freedom than I think I am, because, libertarians hold a lot of positions in common with the left. I think there's some fundamental differences between our worldviews, but in terms of like drug legalization, marry who you want to marry, all these civil issues, free speech, all that kind of stuff, there's nothing incompatible with a lot of the left-wing views there. It's just a difference in sort of worldview and how you view power and authority, I guess.
Yeah, I'm getting a bunch of comments. Let me grab some comments. Diane says, not all Wiccans are far left, but yes, many are. Yeah, so she's on the same page as you. Absolutely. So Josh says, he asks, how could we get Christians and pagans to set aside their differences and make America a more united country? Well, that's a tough one right there.
I think it's a great question, and it's something I'd love to do. There actually are people who consider themselves Christian pagans. I think it's an interesting kind of
Christian pagans.
Yeah, there are such people.
Help me with that one. What's that one?
I don't know if I can totally explain it, but they basically view the Christian pantheon, if you will, the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, as another valid set of gods to worship alongside these other gods. And so there are people who call themselves Christian pagans. I think there's healing to do on both sides. There are a lot of Christians who are very hostile to pagans, and there are a lot of pagans who are very hostile to Christians. A lot of people become pagans because they're, feel like they've been driven to it by bad experiences with the Christian church. And so I know people on both sides who have that hostility. And yeah, we have to overcome that, because like we're all just people and we're all good people. And so This
Well,
kind of
I gotta
stereotyping
say
people based on
something.
their religion is not so good.
What I think this person I'm going to bring up is obviously not a libertarian, but he's running right now. Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah.
He's Hindu, right? I'm pretty sure he's Hindu.
Yeah. I know the guy.
So So I guess that's multiple gods. Would that count as paganism? I'm not sure it would or wouldn't. Do you know?
We don't typically count Hinduism as part of paganism just because it's its own thing and it has, hundreds of millions
Okay.
of adherents. There's a lot of similarities. A lot of the development of Wicca drew from some Hindu traditions when it was developed. This is sort of a tangent, but like Wicca was developed based on this society in Britain in the late 19th century that had compiled all this kind of ancient wisdom. They had Jewish mysticism, they had Hindu mysticism and yoga. They had all these different things. They had medieval witchcraft textbooks,
Oh,
and they compiled it all into one thing. And that's sort of where Wicca comes from. It's very eclectic.
I always thought Wiccan was from the Celts. That's what I always thought. You just taught me something new.
There's Celtic influence to it, but it's by no means exclusively Celtic. No, it's from all kinds of different traditions, and it was sort of cobbled together in the 1950s. It's a new religion. Like there's this Wiccan mythology that it dates back for an oral tradition for thousands of years. It's not really true or substantially proven by any kind of archaeological record. But it's a mythology. There are aspects of it that are certainly ancient, but the religion as it's practiced today was formalized in the 1950s based on a lot of different eclectic traditions.
There we go. So what Vivek has done, which I think is a very interesting way of, I guess, to the other gentleman's question, or how do we kind of mix them over, is he said that we have the same values. That's what he says, right? That's his pitch.
Yeah.
Right? His pitch is, I'm not Christian. That's what he says. I'm not Christian. I'm Hindu, but we have the same values, right? We have the same Judeo-Christian values. So we're all together on that. We all believe in a God. So that's all good. That's how he pitches it. Now, if I feel like it's working for him, I mean, the Republicans, he's pretty popular. He's not winning, obviously. Trump is winning, but he's up there, right? He's top 3, right? He's still making moves even with that. Is that an answer to just kind of go up here and do a macro?
Yeah, well, to the extent that we do have the same values, then yes, I think that's absolutely the case. It's about, I don't care what your religion is. I don't care what God you worship. I care about what your moral views are, what your, ethical views are. That's the thing that's important. And so if you find someone with whom you share ethical views, then you should get along regardless of what your religions are.
Okay. I'll buy that. Michael Kelly says, just added it to my Amazon. I'm a pagan and libertarian. Right on.
Awesome.
So you've got some fans here already. So there we go. It's all good. Yes. So again, for those of you who are interested, by the way, if you like what you're hearing, if it's interesting, you do me a favor, click that like button. You got to click the like button. It does matter. I know you may be joking. Oh, Larry, who cares? The algorithms care. They care. So click that like button. If you're watching this on Twitter, then please retweet this right now. If you retweet, it does matter. If you want to support the show and get your chat to the front, with super chat me. If you're watching on Larry Sharp YouTube, if you're not, no worries. You can always retweet and click like either way. If you want to see what Logan's doing, you can head over to loganalbright.com, see what he's doing here. So let me go back to the question I have, which is, you taught me something, right? I didn't understand that about Wicca. I always thought Wiccan was directly from the Celts until you told me that that's what I thought it was. So what did you learn while you were right? I mean, clearly you did a lot of research for this, obviously, right? So
yeah.
What did you learn when you were going through this about libertarianism or paganism, either one?
Well, I already knew a lot about libertarianism because I've been steeped in that tradition for, a dozen years or more at this point.
You actually work for Free the People, right?
Yes, I work for an organization called Free the People, a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., making documentary films highlighting liberty values. So check them out at freethepeople.org if you're interested in them. But to answer your question, what did I learn? It was interesting reading about kind of pagan political views. There's people who have done surveys, and there's a lot more libertarianism within the movement than I thought. And the amusing story I like to tell is how hard to control pagans are, which is something that I find a lot of sympathy with as a libertarian. There's a effort by a pagan publisher called Llewellyn to organize a conference of American witches in the 1970s, and they wanted to basically get all the pagans, the witches, the Wiccans together in one group and like formalize their religion and say, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to have a hierarchical structure and we're going to figure everything out. And it immediately disintegrated and everyone was furious about it. There are all these letters that have been collected by various authors from witches who were involved in it, saying, "How dare you try to like bind us within the structure of this organization? We're doing our own thing. Leave us alone." And I was like, "Well, this is perfect. It's like herding cats. It reminds me of all my libertarian friends, and I find that really endearing as a quality of someone who's just unwilling to be controlled." And that kind of thing kept coming up again and again in my research into paganism. That these are people who basically are super independently minded and don't want to be told what to do, and I think that's great.
What you just said reminded me of a series. I think it's Netflix. I don't know if you happen to have seen it. Do you know the series Peaky Blinders?
I'm aware of it. I haven't watched very much of it.
I won't give anything away, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about it just because it reminded me of this. In that series, it's about early 1900s, early 20th century gangs, basically in the Midlands of England, right? Manchester, that area, right? The Midlands of England. That's what it's about. And the gang leaders are half gypsy. So the gypsy side of the family is exactly what you said. They all like go out and do what they want, and nobody can control them, and people don't like them, and all that, stuff, just what you were saying. And of course, that makes the gangsters, being part that's their culture too. They don't want to hear the cops. They don't want to do anything. They're just fight the whole deal. I feel like would like a subculture like, I don't know, they call them gypsies in the series. I think now they're called Romani. I think there's a different word for them now. So does that count as paganism? Is that in the same world, or is that a separate thing also?
There's definitely similarities there. A lot of gypsy traditions have been incorporated into modern paganism. There's some of the foundational texts that kind of built modern paganism were drawn from gypsy traditions. So yeah, there's definitely similarities there. Yeah,
that's the part I feel it made me. There was a part of it. It's kind of funny. There was a part of it that made me jealous. Right? That I was like, man, they're freer than me. Like, I want to be like that too. Right? But there's a part of me that's like, no, I like my internet. Like, so I was definitely torn on both sides of that for sure. So I guess the other question I have for you is, what kind of response are you getting? I mean, libertarians already don't get a great response.
Right.
Pagans don't get a great response. You just doubled up on that. You're like, I'm going to do the double negative response. But is that what's happening? Are people happy, don't care, ecstatic? What's the response you're getting?
I've mostly had a pretty positive response. I've had a number of pagans be like, "Oh, this is like totally right up my alley. I hadn't thought about it in these terms before." And that's really exciting to get. The only negative response I've gotten really so far, I haven't had much of a negative response from pagans, although I'm expecting to get more of one soon. The only negative response I've had so far is in trying to get my book reviewed in some kind of libertarian publications that have big Christian audiences. There's a lot of like sensitivity towards that. They're like, well, we don't want to piss off our Christian audiences by talking about paganism. So that's really the only kind of negative response I've had, but most people have been pretty welcoming to it and open to it.
That's great. Shelly says, I'm a Christian libertarian, and she's still watching. So you haven't alienated my Christian audience.
Well, yeah, I don't want to. I mean, I think I have a lot of Christian friends and I love them very much. And so like, I don't want to say you're wrong for being Christian or anything. I mean, that's one of the great things about paganism that I like is it's non-evangelical. It's not trying to convert anybody. It's not trying to tell anyone else that they're wrong. We're not saying we don't want to like take over the world with pagans. We're just saying, hey, this works for us and leave us alone and let us do it. And we're happy if you have another way of doing it. The expression that I always like to use is there are many paths to the top of the mountain. So however you get to spiritual fulfillment, I'm happy for you. I don't want to alienate anybody and say that you're doing it wrong. I'm just saying that if you're like me and these traditions haven't worked for you, you may want to try something else, and this may be an answer for you. That's all.
So if you had to give me, like, I guess one or two of the biggest takeaways that someone could take away from the book, what would one or two of them be?
I think the biggest similarity that I ran into is ethical, and it's about non-aggression. You know, the libertarians talk about this non-aggression principle, which is a little jargony, but like it's helpful to explain what libertarians believe, which is that you shouldn't. It's immoral to initiate force against someone else who hasn't initiated force against you. And then if you read into Wicca, they have a central ethical guideline called the Wiccan Rede. and it goes 8 words the wicked read fulfill, and ye harm none, do what you will. So basically says the same thing. Don't hurt anybody, but you can do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting anybody. It's the same thing as the non-aggression principle in somewhat more flowery language. So the ethical guidelines there are very similar to what they are in libertarianism. And then there's the rest is sort of open-ended. It's a lot of personal responsibility for you to figure out what you think is right and wrong and to deal with the consequences. There's no like 10 commandments of paganism. There's no Bible of paganism. There's no Pope of paganism. A lot of it is left to the individual to decide. And they say, we're not going to tell you what to do, but you have to understand the way the universe works, that what you put out into the universe, you get back at you. And so you have to live with the consequences of your actions. And it's very personal. And I find that a very libertarian idea. So that'd be my main kind of takeaway from the ethical similarities between libertarianism and paganism.
Got it. Roy says, if only all belief systems held the non-aggression principle, the world would be a safer and freer place.
Absolutely.
It's not wrong. Roy is not wrong. Diane says, I don't know if this is true. She says, Gypsy was the tag that outsiders put on the Romani. Oh, I was right. It's called Romani. Thank you for that, Diane. I remember there was a different word for it now, the Romani. Thank you. For whatever reason, many Europeans thought they came from Egypt. Huh. Had you heard that, Logan?
Yeah, I believe that's correct. It's been a word that's stuck around in a lot of contexts, but I know a lot of people consider it a slur, and they're trying to change it to Roma or Romani.
Roma or Romani. Okay, I don't. If anybody who's a Romani was listening, my use of the word was because of ignorance, not because I was trying to be mean. I didn't know any better. And in that series, they use that word, so I was copying the word they use from that series. I meant no. I was not trying to insult anyone. If anyone is insulted by that, that was not my goal at all. So I guess the other piece I would bring up here is if that's the takeaway, is there something in, I guess, this paganism concept similar to what's in Christianity with the idea of, give unto Caesar what is his and give to God what is his, or that kind of thing? I'm not quoting it right, but the idea that the state should exist. The state does exist. It's just separate from us, and it gets what it does, and we get what we get. So is there that similar thing as in, court systems are okay, or cops are okay, or military is, or any of those things? Does any of that exist in the pagan world?
Well, I don't think there's anything that's specific in paganism about what, public policy should be. It's more of a general attitude towards authority and a general attitude towards power that I find I'm sympathetic towards, which is to be suspicious of it and to be a little bit cautious around people who want or try to claim power. I'm sure there are many pagans who are very comfortable with the existence of the state and the military and things like that. There are others who are less so. I know there are anarchist pagans, there are libertarian pagans, there are Democrat pagans, there are Republican pagans. So there's all types. There was a survey that done, this was back in the 1970s, but a book I was reading talked about the survey of political beliefs. And she said she got a bunch of libertarians, a few anarchists, a few Democrats, a few Republicans, and one fascist. So you occasionally get fascist libertarians or fascist pagans as well. So it's not universal by any stretch of the imagination, but I just think there's general sympathies in the worldview, in the way that we look at power and authority and these kind of structures that make libertarians and pagans natural allies.
Well, I guess, could one call the occult of Nazi German pagan fascists?
Totally. You? Yes. Although Nazi Germany was kind of explicitly Catholic in a lot of ways, but yeah, their interest in the occult was certainly an overlap with the pagans.
Well, there we go. I was gonna, because when you first said fascist pagan, I'm like, how do you become a fascist pagan? I'm like, oh yeah, there's really
there's also it's unfortunate to have to talk about, but there's also certain strains of like Scandinavian paganism that are a little bit white nationalist. And that's something that the pagan community has to deal with internally because it's a problem.
But I'm glad you brought that up. This is an attack, right? That I know pagans do get. Pagans get the attack that, oh, you just want to be a white. That's cover for white supremacy. I have heard that before, and if I remember right, please correct me if I'm wrong. There is a symbol, and I think it's like an upside down Thor's hammer symbol, and people who are pagans sometimes wear that similar to a cross or a Star of David or something. And then when people see it, they go, that's Nordic, so that's white supremacy. Am I saying,
Well,
I may be off? Am I about right there?
I think you are. I don't know about the symbol specifically, so I don't want to say anything about it. But and I want to clarify that there are lots of Nordic pagans. They call themselves heathens or asatru, who are wonderful people and are not white nationalists. I know some of them, but there is a strain of it that is, regrettable. That is sort of explicitly anti-Christian and explicitly racist and explicitly nationalist. And but it's not all of them. But it's just something that we have to be on guard against as a community because it's out there.
Got it. So if yeah, now that you're saying it, I remember that happening. That oh yeah, he has that symbol, so therefore he is this bad guy. I said to myself, is that really how that works? I didn't think it to be true, but I remember someone saying that completely. Absolutely. So let me ask you, Logan, you've written this book. You're talking, trying to sell the book, get people to understand it, move forward. What's next? Is this something does something grow from this? Or is this just something you did, you like it, and you move on to something else?
I don't know. I don't really have any explicit plans to follow it up with any further text on this. I think that I've said what I have to say on the subject, and I'm happy for people to discover it. I have a couple of other ideas for libertarian books, and I have a couple of other ideas for pagan books that I may get into at some point. But I don't know. I'm kind of taking a break from writing at the moment, so we'll see what happens.
So are you doing any events with this, like showing up at bookstores and stuff and at events and that kind of thing?
I'm so glad you asked. This Sunday, November 12th, I will be at the Phoenix and Dragon bookstore in Atlanta, Georgia, doing a book signing there. That's the only one I have on the calendar at the moment. But if any of your viewers are in the Atlanta area, that's where I will be on this Sunday. So I'd love to have you stop by.
There we go. And if anything else going on, they can go to loganalbright.com. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Excellent. So what did I miss, Logan? Is there something we should be speaking out before we wrap this up? Did I miss something? Anything else we should bring up?
The only other thing I think I would say is another similarity between libertarians and pagans worldviews that I wanted to bring up is just the attitudes towards uncertainty. I think there's a comfort with uncertainty in both groups of people that you don't see anywhere else. Like pagans don't feel the need to have all the answers. They don't say okay, we got our sacred text. This is the literal word of God. It tells us everything we need to know. We're done. We know everything. It's a lifelong kind of journey of continuing to understand and figure out the divine and figure out our place in the universe and things like that. And I think that's quite similar to the libertarian attitude of, not claiming to know how everything should work, saying, leave things up to the wisdom of crowds and the spontaneous order of the market to solve these problems and figure it out, because we as individuals don't have enough knowledge to figure that out. And so that's another similarity that I encountered. And there's several more in the book that we didn't get into. So if people are interested, they can check it out there.
But hold on, I want to step. You walked on a road that I kind of want to spend a couple seconds on. Can I keep you for a couple minutes?
Of course.
Yeah. The idea of uncertainty also goes to the idea of control. They're linked, right? The more uncomfortable I am with uncertainty, the more control I try to grab, right? That's just natural instinct. And I feel like, to your point, libertarians tend to be like, it'll be okay. The invisible hand of the market will figure it out, right? We'll do it, right? And I feel like that's a similar thing, almost like nature will find a way in paganism. Am I right?
Yes, you're right. I think that people who feel like they have all the answers and they know everything are then comfortable trying to impose that on others because they're like, well, I'm right, so I can impose that on other people. And then similarly, as you were getting at, people who are uncomfortable with uncertainty try to control every aspect of their own lives as well and say, I have to lock everything down so that I don't have any uncertainty in my life. And that usually doesn't end well either. So being open to just letting things happen the way they're supposed to happen, I think is a common kind of worldview between these two groups of people. And I think that's good. I think that people who feel like they've reached the end of their journey of knowledge, you're not going to grow anymore. You're not going to change anymore. And you want to have that continual lifelong process of trying to understand more about the world you live in and yourself.
I want to go further on this, though. I'm with you, but I also feel like now we're safer, right? Because if the second I think I need to have certainty, I need to control everything, well, that means I have to control you, Logan.
Yes.
And if you don't do what I want, then I'm going to use force to get you to do what I want because I got to have control. But if I'm more like, look, it'll be fine. As long as it doesn't come into my house and start doing stuff, I don't care.
Right.
So I think we're actually safer with this. But my my feeling is the emotion that Americans have is when we hear libertarianism and paganism, we feel like we're going to be more in danger.
Yeah, people fear what they don't know. People fear uncertainty, and it's understandable why people fear uncertainty, because you don't know what it is. It could be awful, but that's the world we live in. And I think that you're right. You're totally right that we are safer in a world of uncertainty because you don't have people trying to impose their views on everyone else. Like there's this great book by Karl Popper about the open society and its enemies, and he talks about utopian social engineering and the idea that if we're trying to build a utopia, then everything has to serve that goal. And we have anyone who does anything else, anything who steps out of line has to be brought back into line through force in order to help build the perfect society. Libertarianism is non-utopian. Paganism is non-utopian. We don't believe in this perfect paradise on earth. It's like things are going to be messy, and that's okay.
Well, it's funny you say that because my day job, some people know this, is I'm a business consultant, a trainer, and a coach is what I do, a teacher, do that kind of stuff. And one of the things I teach when it comes to businesses, I tell people, zero tolerance policies always fail. They always make things worse every time. They sound good. They feel good. They sometimes protect you in lawsuits, but they are terrible for your environment. And they go, why? I say, because when you demand perfection, you will get deception. That's how it works. Because nobody's perfect. You're never going to be perfect. But because you have to be perfect, they're going to lie. They're going to say they're perfect. So when you demand perfection, you get deception. And I think this goes here too. In a world of, and I go back to what Bastiat wrote in The Law, right? Again, I'm going to paraphrase. I'm not good at quoting sometimes, so I'm going to paraphrase it. Some people who read it, what I'm talking about. I don't know if you read his book or not.
Of course.
But so he talks about the idea of someone comes to Paris and says, like, where is your minister of bread? And they're like, what do you mean? It's like, well, then how do you feed everybody? Like, you got to have a food minister, right? I mean, you got all these people. How are you going to feed them? And they're like, no, the market just feeds them. The people who need bread, they make the bread and it's fine. And the guy's mind is blown. He's like, no, you got to have a minister of bread or something, don't you? And I keep thinking about that. You don't have to have a minister of bread. And if you have a minister of bread and he doesn't feed people, he's going to lie and say he's feeding them and they're going to starve, just like in Russia.
Yeah. I'm a great fan of Bastiat. I think he was an incredibly clear thinker and he wrote some great books. And yeah, it's absolutely right.
Absolutely. So Josh says, he's talking about not being perfect. He says, I'm a practicing Norse pagan, and our beliefs are that no one is perfect and that we are constantly improving. There is no right or wrong, only lessons. That sounds amazing, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's totally true. You have the opportunity to do better every single day and to try to fix your mistakes and to keep improving. And you're never going to finish the journey, but it's a journey worth taking. And that's just something I like about the pagan religion is you're not expected. There's no like heaven or hell to worry about. There's no 10 commandments to worry about. There's no Pope telling you what to think or what to believe or what to do, but you're accountable to yourself and you're accountable to your community to live a good life and to be a good person and to do the best you can. And you just have to face the consequences of your actions here on earth.
Yeah, but at no Pope, you get no cool hats. I mean, I do like the cool hat.
Oh, we have lots of cool hats. What are you talking about?
Oh, is that true? I didn't know painters had cool hats.
Haven't you seen witches' hats? They're great. And wizard hats.
Oh,
wonderful.
You're right. You're right. Okay, I take that back. I like good hats. So yeah. I think you're winning me back now because I do like the cool hats. That's awesome. That's good. Guys, if you like what you're seeing, please click the like button. I know I bug you all the time, but I want to see all the likes we possibly can. If you want to support Logan, head over to loganalbright.com. I want to say thank you guys so much. Logan, anything before we wrap this up?
That's about all.
Excellent. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you all. I will be back over this weekend doing something. I don't know what yet, but I'll do something this weekend. And Monday night, I'll be back on also. And during the day, I will have a special Libertarians Drinking Coffee Live. So I will be busy in the next couple of days.